All right, everybody. Welcome to Strange Oddities Podcast Live. We are simulcasting on Facebook and YouTube. As always, guys, let's get the boring stuff out of the way. I'm back. That's right. I'm back live after a little hiatus, guys. I'm excited to be back. I have an awesome guest to introduce to everybody. I can't wait to introduce him to our listeners. But before we introduce this awesome, amazing guest, let's get all that logistics out of the way real fast. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to Strange Oddities Podcast, please go to my YouTube channel, Strange Oddities Podcast, that little bell. Click that little bell and you will be subscribed to the show. We're almost at 200 subscribers already, thousands of views. Can't thank you guys enough for tuning in and being a avid listener to the show. Hope you guys really enjoy the topics and the guests that I bring on to the show. Guys, if there's any technical issues that I should know about, I can't exactly hear myself live, so let me know in the little chat. There's a chat if you have questions for the guest or me during the show. Throw it in there. We'll try to answer it best we can. But without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this nice gentleman. I'm going to give him a nice little, give you guys a little background on him before I bring him in. You may recognize him. He's been on TV. He's a TV personality. He's actually a doctor in PhD in history. Um, Guys, his bio here says Dr. Mark L. Mirabello, author and professor of history at Shawnee State University in the USA, and has served as a visiting professor of history. I hope I say this correctly. At Nizhny Novgorod University in Russia. Hopefully, I said that correct. Mirabello's area of expertise is the outlaw history on the frontiers and margins of human civilization. He lectures on alternative religions, cults, secret societies, terrorism, and crime, banned books, the afterlife concepts in world history, fascist Europe and Nazi Germany, myths and legends, intellectual history, and other subjects. His publications deal with the supernatural, a traveler's guide to the afterlife, traditions and beliefs on death, dying, and what lies beyond, the Odin Brotherhood, and the crimes of Jehovah, the unnatural cannibal within, and the natural handbook for rebels and outlaws. Dr. Mirabello's current project is a new book on secret societies and conspiracies, which is the topic we're going to talk about tonight with Dr. Mirabello, and I'm excited because it's one of my favorite topics. Some of his works have been translated into Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. He's appeared on the History Channel discussing deadly cults in the series called Ancient Aliens and in America's Book of Secrets. He's appeared with Professor Noam Chomsky in M.A. Littler's Maverick film on freedom, The Kingdom of Survival. Guys, I will share his website with you so you guys can learn more about him. He's got an extensive bio there available, along with all his other books there. I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. Dr. Mirabello, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on tonight.
Well, it's an honor to be here, sir. A great honor. Now, by the way, you may have just noticed that I did this. That's actually a secret society gesture.
Okay.
And again, by the way, before we start, I just wanted to say, because it's October 7th, this is the anniversary. Sadly, I called him the master of those who know. My father passed away in 2007 on this particular date.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to pay tribute to him. Great man. But when I made that gesture, and again, I won't mention which secret society it is because it's actually a relatively dangerous one. Once you understand how secret societies work, I'm talking about you in terms of the general public, frequently, in fact, you can watch newscasts and so forth, and their prominent people are sending messages, often with choice words, hand gestures, and key phrases, motions, and almost a silent communication goes on. They're sending the message among the brotherhood. Now, incidentally, I'll be using male terms. I'm in a university right now, and there's all these issues over sexism and so forth. But overwhelmingly, secret societies are male. There are a few female ones, especially in antiquity and prehistoric times. But it seems to be a male obsession. And typically, the male secret societies have gruesome oaths and will often involve death rituals, sort of pseudo-death rituals. Obviously, the Yale Skull and Bones is a classic example. And incidentally, their symbol will be, of course, the skull, 2 thigh bones. You'll notice 322 number there. Secret societies typically communicate often with numbers. And that seems to be a reference to Genesis 3:22, which says, "You will be as gods."
Oh, interesting.
And one of the characteristics of secret societies, oh, and by the way, the lower jaw is missing on the skull. That's significant. It indicates silence. And when I say you will be as gods, it reminds me that virtually one of the main goals of secret societies is the teaching that those who are not with us are beneath us. So it fosters a kind of elitism, mutual aid among members. Nice. And outsiders are viewed as, shall we say, the profane. But sorry, I didn't mean to go off in the long.
No, that's okay. No, that's great. Everybody's got a really good introduction to what secret societies are. There's quite a few of them out there. There's a big, extensive list of prominent key figures and people who played specific roles in them, such as lawyers and doctors, attorneys, senators. You mentioned Skull and Bones. What did you think? I know it's Hollywood, but did you think that the movie The Skulls, which I think was based off of Skull and Bones, was kind of accurate, like towards its legacy?
Well, in fact, I have to confess, I'm a fan of older things, and I really didn't care for that particular film as much.
Okay.
One of my favorite films, in fact, I recommend it to your audience, is The Brotherhood of the Bell.
Okay.
Which, oddly enough, was broadcast. It's got Glenn Ford. Now, again, older people would have known who he was, leading man at one time, largely probably forgotten by the younger people today. And it clearly is modeled on Skull and Bones. And was a TV movie, which is really curious. And you can find it on, last time I looked, on YouTube, although you can also purchase it. But it's really well done. And it begins with the young college student, Glenn Ford, in an elite school, and he's swearing oaths. And he goes through these rituals. And to him, as a young man, he's basically just bonding with his friends and having fun. And by the way, we'll see as the hour goes on, well, the element of play is really important in secret societies. Basically, men acting as boys. And I mention this because often they're misunderstood because people will steal some of their documents and so forth. And they will think, oh my gosh, these are horrible people. But these are men playing as boys. Well, for example, we have, and I'll get Brotherhood and the Bell in a moment, but we have evidence that originally Skull and Bones, the initiates, there's 15 each year. Now, again, we can't prove this because it's secret society, but there were reports that they would lie naked in a coffin and rehearse their sexual experiences all the way back from prep school masturbation.
Yikes.
And now Skull and Bones will probably not be around in its present form in a few more years. That sounds curious because in the 1990s, they admitted women. Wow. Women are more serious. They don't put up with the games and the antics. So it'll eventually evolve into a social club. Normally, it's almost like when women are allowed, or I should say, settle in frontier states, when the men are there alone, it's a wild, wild west. But when women arrive, things become more stabilized and so forth. So Skull and Bones will eventually morph into just an elite social club. And the sinister aspects will clearly disappear because those are boys playing games. Now, in the Brotherhood of the Bell, Glenn Ford swears these oaths, and then he's talking to his older mentor, and he says after the ritual is over, now I'm part of the elite. He says it half mockingly, And the mentor replies, "You are the elite." And then the film fast forwards, and if you will, over time. And he's been a highly successful professor at a distinguished university. All of his articles are published, reviewed in glowing terms. All of his books are published, reviewed in glowing terms. Every time he seeks a promotion, he receives it. Even his beautiful wife, he later discovers, is all connected to his membership in the Brotherhood of the Bell. And what he discovers, this is the core part of the film, he is approached by, again, a senior mentor, and they tell him they now are demanding that everything he's accomplished, he thinks, in life is not really from him. It's the Brotherhood of the Bell. They're behind the scenes, fostering him and his career. Even his wife, who's far too beautiful for him, was a result of the Brotherhood of the Bell. And they say, now we want a favor in return. And incidentally, one of the key notions of secret societies, and you see it in classic mafia, which is a secret society, a gift demands a gift. The mafia never demands immediate payment. They will do something for you, but then they expect, when the time is right, something is done for them. Well, at any rate, the Brotherhood is asking that a certain professor be rejected for tenure. Now, they don't explain why in the film, but almost certainly they have their own person they want to put in the position. He balks at first, Glenn Ford does, but then eventually he relents when he realizes how much they've done for him. He votes the professor down. Now, this is a bit melodramatic. The professor then commits suicide. And then the rest of the film is Glenn Ford, who's outraged, tries to expose it for what this Brotherhood is. And that's when it gets really interesting, because every time he tries to expose it, they make him look paranoid and insane, foolish. Like he gets ridicule and denial. And in fact, there's a classic scene where he's going to go on a talk show to expose it. Before the talk show begins, kind of like this, I guess you could say, is the interviewer is saying, we're going to blow the lid off of this scandal. Then when he's actually on the live broadcast, the interviewer focuses on ridiculing him, making him look insane. Which reminds me, Lee Harvey Oswald's former friend, former friend when he was in the Marines, Kerry Thornley, actually said, he's quoting another writer, there is no such thing as paranoia. It's invented by the ruling elite to try to discredit anyone who tries to expose them.
Wow.
Because as soon as you come out and say, oh, there's something sinister going on,
Sure.
or I should say the game is rigged. And I want to emphasize that. I think when I say sinister, that was incorrect, because what secret societies do, we live in a rigged game. And frankly, they're rigging the game.
Right.
So, and you really can't fight them. Often I've been on other podcasts, and especially guests, or I should say listeners, will call in and say what could be done. Yeah. And frankly, I think the only advice is to maybe join one, because they're too much a part of the network.
Right.
And you really can't take them down.
Yeah.
In fact, one really powerful, in a sense, secret society, and by the way, I define it broadly when they have secrets. One really powerful one would be what the conspiracy people call the Jekyll Island Group. Everyone knows it as the Federal Reserve.
Right.
And you get all of these people attacking the Federal Reserve, but frankly, you don't want to take it down, because if you did, it would destroy our entire economy.
Right. And their financial resources as well.
Yes. And frankly, it reminds me of Samson at the Temple of Dagon, when he is blinded and he knocks over the pillars, oddly enough, kills 3,000 men, women, and children. I mentioned the 3,000. It's exactly the same as 9/11. It's interesting, the parallel. We view one as a great crime, one as an act of a hero. It just shows that history is viewed by perspective.
Wow.
But he managed to kill the Philistines, but he killed himself in the process. Wow. So our money supply, which is, again, all tied to the Federal Reserve,
Right.
is if you took it down, it would cause enormous problems. Speaking of which, not to get too far afield,
Yeah.
but um, everyone's heard of this particular individual. He was killed brutally in 2011, and the country. Now, I would not have want to have lived. I would not want to have lived in this country, but it had free health care, free education. Everyone who went to college received a stipend while in college, free tuition. If they studied overseas, they received a free car while they were overseas students and a stipend. Uh, Bread was about 12 cents a loaf. Gasoline was about 17 cents a gallon. There were no landlords in the entire country. Newlyweds would get a house and $50,000, and the house they would have to pay back, but there was no mortgage. They would pay the original price. There was no interest on the loan.
Hmm.
And now that almost sounds like a paradise, although it wasn't. But I'm describing Libya under Gaddafi. And how many Americans realize that? And notice the people rose up in rebellion. Again, shows no matter how much stuff we get, if you will, we're still not satisfied. And when they didn't have freedom, so they rose up. But of course, now the country is a total disaster. But the deep conspiracy theory argues that Gaddafi was overthrown not for his crimes or his prison system and so forth, but he didn't have a Western style central bank. The country had a zero national debt. It built a large aquifer water system, debt free.
Wow.
And he was using the oil resources and also was planning to introduce a gold dinar. He was going to introduce gold money again. And soon after, he's destroyed.
Mm.
And I think there is a connection because a gold dinar would have undermined the American dollar.
Yeah.
Which our dollar isn't backed by anything. Now, again, I'm not trying to say he was a great man. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But how if you try to buck the system, it's disaster. Incidentally, end of his life, he's sodomized by a bayonet.
Wow.
Horrible ending.
Yeah. I mean, and then we have a modern day secret society, which we all know as known as Anonymous, which is another organization that doesn't reveal themselves, who also go after money accounts and big companies with a lot of money. They mainly attack like their data, and they try to go after money. Basically, they hold their money for ransom, and hopefully nobody actually gives them anything, which I think people have. But because they don't know any better, or they try to stop them from holding them hostage and stuff like that. But Anonymous is another big one.
Yes, and by the way, they famously have gone after Scientology. Now, I'm not a Scientologist, but I really feel uncomfortable with the hostility directed towards Scientology.
Right.
And whenever, as a historian, well, let's just say in World War II, bomber crews used to say, when the flak is heavy, we're on target. And whenever I see a great deal of flak directed anywhere, even towards organizations that I'm not involved with, it makes me really suspicious. In fact, whenever I see herd behavior, stampedes,
right,
I get really suspicious. And we're witnessing this now. For if someone were to watch this a couple of years in the future, we're now in 2021 with this so-called coronavirus going on. And what's interesting is historically, when there's a crisis, the authorities, so-called, they will try to calm people down. It's famously such as the Jaws movie denying that there's any trouble in the water. You can go out and swim because we don't want to lose business. And in this case, from the start, and by the way, on 9/11, when the planes hit the buildings, the public address system was announcing inside the World Trade Center towers, be calm, help is coming, stay where you are. And that's normally how the so-called authorities function. They don't want panics. And from the start, this one, they've been whipping up hysteria. And I'm not altogether certain why, but the behavior is really peculiar. And I'm not certain if it's social engineering going on. For example, trying to move everyone online in terms of education and working. Is it to enrich certain individuals? I saw recently that 8 billionaires were created by the coronavirus crisis,
Oh, wow.
mainly in pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
and but other areas as well. But something is really suspicious. And incidentally, I'm old enough. This is the third flu crisis I've lived through.
Yeah.
Hong Kong flu, 1968. The swine flu, 1976.
Right.
In each case, they first announce a horrific disease that will kill us all. Then they quickly come up with an amazing science. We found a vaccine. And then the thing just disappears. But in the first two, people went to work, children went to school, and most people just ignored the vaccine. In the second one, people went to work, children went to school, and the vaccine turned out to be lethal. It was killing people, so they had to pull it.
Yeah.
But this time, I think in a sense we're becoming more servile. The way, and by the way, I've been reported 7 times at the university because various times not wearing a mask.
Oh boy.
But again, it's just amazing the hysteria about all this.
Yeah.
Locally, we can go to Walmart and Kroger without a mask, but the university you have to wear a mask inside.
Oh, I know. The whole thing is just, it's chaotic. It really is. Before we get too ahead, there's a really good question in the chat, actually, before I miss it. When we were talking about the Federal Reserve a few moments ago, my friend Brad asked a really great question. Is the Federal Reserve, are they mostly owned by one family, like the world's richest families? Is that true, or?
Well, what's curious about it, and by the way, once you get in, now again, I want to make it very clear that my main field is historian of ideas.
Right.
And I also teach myths and legends and so forth. And I always deal, and this confuses my students in classes, try to make it clear. I deal with beliefs.
Right.
Now, a belief does not have to be true to have great power. In the 19th century, there was a Chinese man who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus. And the movement he launched ended up of killing tens of millions of people. So even if something is not true, it can have influence. Now, back to the Federal Reserve, it is curious that 2 American presidents, now one was before the Federal Reserve, issues in the banking system. Technically, the Constitution says that Congress has the right to issue money. 2 presidents issued money without the banking system, Lincoln and Kennedy, and both are shot in the head in public. And in fact, if you go to the Conspiracy Museum in Dallas, that's the thesis, that Kennedy was killed because just before his death, he issued the silver Kennedy dollars that were basically backed by silver and were not backed by the Federal Reserve. And right after his death, Johnson pulled these silver-backed dollars and went back to the Federal Reserve System. Now, the Federal Reserve System, to get to your question about one family, it's actually multiple families.
Right.
But it was set up in 1913. We called it the Jekyll Island Group because they secretly met. 6 men from all major banks, in fact, a couple of them were essentially foreigners, went to the Jekyll Island Resort under fake names. That's off an island off the coast of Georgia, and drew up the plans. And the idea for the Federal Reserve was to preserve and protect the American money supply, the dollar, and
Right.
to give a sound dollar. Well, that's kind of curious because since it was established in 1913, the dollar has lost 98% of its value. In fact, as a historian, I have difficulty talking to students about prices. I usually avoid it because they can't really understand, because the dollar has lost so much value.
Yeah.
You could buy a Model T in the 1920s for $260, brand new car.
Yeah.
And even in my own lifetime, things have gotten. I can still recall as a young college student when I heard of someone making $22,000 a year, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, that's just incredible." That was a large amount of money.
Yeah, sure. For that time.
And now it's not.
Yeah.
So what the real problem, though, with the Federal Reserve is in the 1970s when Nixon pulled off the gold backing. Our money is no longer backed by anything. And regrettably, in the last year especially, They used to say for many years, we just can't turn on the printing presses because it'll destroy the dollar. And they're doing that right now.
Yeah.
You just cannot print money. And incidentally, the way the reserve is set up, every time the government issues money, they have to pay interest to the bankers,
Right.
private bankers. So when they say Federal Reserve, it's no more federal than Federal Express. By the way, Federal Express was founded by a man in Skull and Bones. See how it all ties together.
Yeah, no, it does.
And but it is curious that whenever when you get interest-free money, the economy where it is just booms, and then the leader of that country doesn't survive very long.
Right.
In fact, oddly enough, I hate to say because these were bad people, but fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, and Imperial Japan during World War II all had money that was issued interest-free. And there seem these really, again, deep conspiracy theories that we didn't destroy the Nazis because of their actions and crimes against Jewish people or attacking Poland or so forth. It was because Hitler was issuing money interest-free, and the German economy boomed. When he took power, 6 million people unemployed. That's 1933. By 1938, there was a labor shortage.
Right.
Our standard textbooks say it's because he was rearming Germany, but that's actually false. That didn't produce all the employment. He himself thought that it was from taking the money supply away from the bankers, which he did.
Wow.
But again, you can't do it because it would destroy us.
Yeah.
And people often don't think through consequences, especially in the United States.
Oh, no.
They get involved in crusades. Well, we're seeing it right now with in Europe. They were quickly trying to go to green energy, and now they're getting crises with energy because they don't have, for example, the natural gas problem. We'll do the same thing. In fact, I recently saw I'm not criticizing green energy, but to go totally solar and wind, the solar and wind complex would have to cover an area the size of the state of Illinois to produce that's just our electricity utilities.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic, yet everybody rushes towards it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, Nietzsche talks about, the German philosopher, that basically decadents willingly destroy themselves. They choose what is bad for them. And that's what's really alarming about Western society, in particular in the last few decades.
Right.
It's if we're committing suicide.
Yeah.
We don't even realize it. We're openly embracing what's going on.
With your background in history, being that you're a professor of history, is a really good question, because I've heard this from time to time, and honestly, I don't want it to be true, but unfortunately, you can't help but go back to all like this ancient civilizations and all the great empires that fell when they grown too big. Because they tried to govern themselves, or they whatever reason that is that they fell. But every big great empire in history didn't last, and unfortunately every great empire has fallen over time. And I just fear the United States is not looking too good.
And by the way, we may be living right now in the past year through, and people don't even recognize it. You mentioned how by the way, there used to be, it's not popular anymore, but there used to be a theory that the dinosaurs became extinct because they got too big. Reptiles grow all their lives.
Yeah.
They keep getting bigger and bigger, and the idea was they got too big and died. And we got too rich and too big and too mighty. But the fact that in my lifetime, the Afghans have defeated 2 superpowers is quite stunning. And everybody's ignoring the situation here.
Yeah.
And we're probably witnessing a rebirth of another ideology that will eventually spread elsewhere. And it's a warlike, I'm not talking about, we always talk about it's radical Islam. There's more than that. It's a warlike. And typically, civilizations get soft. Oh, by the way, as they age, they become more tolerant. more loving, nurturing. They care for their weakest members, and those are all good things. But basically they turn into elderly grandmothers, and then warlike types who are poor come in and take what they have, what the rich have. In fact, endlessly in history, you get a soft, rich elite that eventually is destroyed by the massive warlike poor, who are, Napoleon famously said, the best training for a soldier is poverty.
Right.
And by the way, in Afghanistan, when our soldiers were there, the 10-year-old girls used to laugh at the Americans because our special forces men would get sick drinking their water that little girls can drink. The poverty, the dirt floors, the intestinal parasites toughen them up. And what will happen in the cycle of history, we'll fall to some warlike ideology, and then eventually it'll become soft.
Right.
And then something else will. It's just the endless progress of history.
Yeah, it repeats itself. Yeah.
And now I didn't mean to criticize the changes that occurred in America, because all kinds of people benefited by having a more open, nurturing, loving society. But in a sense, it disarms us to the perils outside. Incidentally, when the Romans collapsed, they were just stunned because it had been centuries since an enemy army had gotten into Italy. And they were used to fighting all their wars overseas, far away, I should say.
Right.
And then suddenly, and I should also mention that the barbarians were not trying to destroy Rome. They were trying to live there. That point's often missed.
Yeah.
But it's like inviting a biker bar group into your house. They're going to trash the place.
Yeah.
And when the barbarians moved in, they couldn't maintain the empire. And it just fragmented and collapsed.
Wow. I love history because of me being a paranormal investigator. I've actually learned a lot more about history being an investigator than what I learned in school, believe it or not. Because you learn about the little things that you don't learn in school because everything's so commercial in school and everything. And if you were my history teacher, I would be I'd be loving it. I would love to be in your classroom.
Oh, thank you.
But I want to talk a little bit about your book. You have a book called it's about the Odin Brotherhood. I couldn't gather much research about it because I know there's not a lot of info. You're pretty much the main researcher about the Odin Brotherhood because you also have a book about it. I want to give everybody a little background about the Odin Brotherhood. If this is accurate, this actually, I think, is a little insert about things that you've written about. Is the name of a group that practices modern pagan religion of heathenry. And the group first came to attention when Dr. Mark Mirabello published a book discussing the group and its beliefs, that the Odin Brotherhood in 1992. A second book on the group, The Way of the Odin Brotherhood, by Jack Wolf, also published in 2013. But according to account, the Brotherhood alleges to be direct survival of an ancient pre-Christian belief system. Dr. Mirabello's book has been mentioned in several publications on religions of secret societies, which is what we've been talking about, and the Odin Brotherhood is listed as the 8th edition of J. Gordon Melton's Encyclopedia of American Religions. Other scholars and many in the heathen community have expressed skepticism as to the Brotherhood's existence. So I'm assuming that there's some controversy of their existence.
Well, there's several points that I should mention. When you mention heathenry, which is curious because this is how our civilization works. I was actually expelled from Wikipedia.
Oh, wow.
Because I tried to correct that.
Yeah.
I wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, you have these new age people in America, and they're rebels. And for example, heathen sounds like an interesting term, but in fact, both heathen and pagan, frankly, mean hick or country dweller. In the United States, heathen also means, especially in the South, a drunken, drug-addled, unemployed moron. And at any rate, I tried to use the more the term pagan and neo-pagan, even though it technically has the same meaning as country dweller, but it has more of a soiree about it. And I got into there was some editor there that just knew how to use the system and expelled me from the system.
Oh, wow.
So, but again, normally professors don't write. It's just, it's slumming. So it didn't really matter when you're writing Wikipedia articles.
Right.
But back to the original point, over the years, see, I encountered them as a college student. I was a PhD student at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and I'm in a bookstore in Leith, Scotland. That's a little port city that joins Edinburgh. And this really interesting gentleman with a tweed sport coat, Eastern European accent, saw me. I happened to pick up a book on the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross. Now, in those days, I wasn't really well read at all in secret societies whatsoever. I'm dating myself. This is years ago. And it's a Christian secret society, the Rosicrucians. Now, the original ones, not the ones you find in advertisements and magazines, but the original Brotherhood of the Rose Cross. And in fact, it's almost like a poster child for what most secret societies allegedly do. Well, this gentleman invited me to a meeting, a dinner. We were talking, and it was in London, and I was living in Glasgow, but I would practically go to London. And I took a train, and I would always go down and buy books when I was there and do some research in the British Museum. And I go to the location, and there was no address at that particular address, and nobody was there. It was just a blind lead. So I just got left, went back to bookstores, got back on the train, and left. I then encountered him a second time. Again, I don't know if this is coincidence or not. And he told me about another meeting. Gave me a location and a time. This time, the location was correct. It was back in London again, but nobody was there. No one was there. Then I knew enough about secret societies. That's what's called a test or an ordeal. I notice often these are misunderstood by the general public. In fact, they continued in fraternities as hazing rituals. And now the public has outlawed hazing. It's a test, though. Although the hazing rituals in fraternities degenerated into drunken antics, it's originally supposed to be a test. And I was sensing this. Usually, by the way, you'll notice numbers. I said this repeatedly appear in secret societies. And typically, it's odd numbers. It goes back to the ancient Romans. Odd numbers are superior to even numbers because if you add an odd number to an even number, it's always an odd number. So you'll see in particular, 3, 5, and 7, as well as 9, appear in secret society lore, especially 3. The 3 Masons have the 3 ruffians, 3 knocks on the door, the 3 officers in the lodge. So it's 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Well, the third time I encountered this gentleman again, third time, the location was correct, the time was correct, they were there. And it was a dinner. And we were just discussed. I was a young man, we were discussing religions. And they talked about this secret society. And I continued my contacts and then asked them if I could write some material on it. Now, my PhD dissertation had absolutely nothing to do with the subject. I was writing on controversies in the Church of Scotland in the 17th century. So it has nothing to do with this whatsoever. And I thought, well, I'll write something afterward. I eventually published the work in 1992. And what I was stunned over the years, I assumed at the time, kind of young ingenue, if you will, that the most of the skepticism would be over, are there really people that believe these gods exist? But in fact, I received enormous hostility by people claiming I made the whole thing up. And I don't know where that came from. But that's why I liked it when Jack Wolf published his work, because I'm not the only one out there. And it is small, and they do communicate obliquely and secretly. For example, for years, they would put like classified ads in Soldier of Fortune magazine, or they will leave cryptic messages in library books. Someone will take a book, typically on Norse religion. The Odin Brotherhood is devoted to the old Norse gods. which of course the public now knows through pop culture like Odin, Thor, and Freya, and so forth.
Kind of like, and as far back as the Vikings kind of thing.
Yes.
Right.
Although fundamentally their teaching is that there are that all Indo-European pantheons are actually the same. And over time, like the Roman gods, Greek gods, Celtic gods, Slavic gods, Germanic gods, over time, the lore gets corrupted. And because the Vikings were the last of the Indo-Europeans to become civilized, they preserved the lore in a more intact form. And the whole purpose of the group is to protect the lore, although they have unusual beliefs such as long as they exist, the world doesn't end. Now, in Norse religion, the end is not the end. When this earth is destroyed, it'll be replaced by another world. So it's not like Judaic Christianity, or at least Christianity. Judaism doesn't have the same concept of a violent end. But in Christianity, this is the one linear time. And when this ends, everyone goes to heaven or paradise or existence or non-existence. I say non-existence because some Christians teach annihilationism, that hell is not a torture chamber, it's just the grave. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that. You either go to heaven, a paradise on earth, or you just don't exist when you die. And frankly, that seems to be what Paul taught, because Paul never uses the word hell. You can win bets on that. And he seems to say that those who have the faith survive. Well, back to Norse religion, another odd question I received over the years, they would say, and this comes up all the time, if it's a secret society, why does it have a forum and a website? But they're all posting anonymously. The secret in the secret society is the identity of the members.
Right. And they're also trying to recruit people too, which is why they do that.
Yeah, spread the lore. Although I say that because they kind of resist the term of proselytizing, missionary work. They think we all are controlled by destiny or fate. There are these three entities called the Norns, who are female, and they determine the fate even of gods and goddesses. So if you encounter their lore, it's because it's your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, it's to make people stronger. And if you don't become a member of the brotherhood, it doesn't mean you'll have some horrific afterlife or you'll be punished by angry Norse gods. It's simply they want to keep the traditions going. And they think these gods are, and by the way, they think that all gods exist. They don't deny that Jehovah exists.
Yeah.
Or Jesus exists.
Yeah, no.
Or that the various
heavily, yeah.
Yes. Polytheism thinks that there are many, many pantheons. Voodoo gods exist. And they view them as kind of their friends. And what's really interesting is that's what first attracted me doing research. They think these gods are here all the time. And I encountered one woman who claimed she met the god Tyr. And then another man, I did not meet him directly. It was only through indirect correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
He said the god Odin spent 2 weeks in his house.
Wow.
And oddly enough, I received letters, postmarked, no return address, Frankfurt, Germany, allegedly sent, written in verse, from Odin. I don't know if they were or not. They're really interesting, though. So they say these gods are here all the time. And they view this as a place of adventure. So it was a fascinating experience for me. And that's what got me going on this. Although there was a second impact. I noticed when I was a graduate student, all the really important people in Britain are Freemasons.
Right.
The average policeman on the street is not, perhaps, but the chief of police is.
Yeah.
The chief professors.
Right.
And so forth.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the Freemasons, because actually on the article, the list I have, I had told Dr. Mirabello that I have this article with a good list of all this, this really cool secret society kind of stuff that it lists. A lot of them you may not have heard of, but a lot of them are kind of like the ones that people kind of know about already because of news magazines and the media and stuff like that. But the Freemasons are allegedly descendants of the Knights Templar. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, in fact, the Swedish Masons, there's different types of Masons, and the ones in Sweden, they tap into that and say directly that they're directly from the Knights Templar. And by the way, at the upper levels of Swedish Masonry, you get a knighthood at the top levels because the king is the head of the Swedish Freemasons.
Yeah.
Now, in Great Britain, most Americans are most familiar with the English-speaking Freemasons. And by the way, they do for example, French, excuse me, that's why I keep drinking water.
Yeah, no problem.
French Freemasons.
I got to drink every now and then too.
Yeah, it's not vodka.
Yeah.
and French Freemasons admit women, whereas the American and British ones do not. Now, the historians, and by the way, I refer to Orthodox historians, they don't like anything sensational. They typically date the emergence of Freemasons in 1717, although some will take it back. David Stevenson, who oddly enough had the same PhD director I did and later worked on the Freemasons, dates them earlier from Scotland. And the idea of there's a Templar link is because there are stories that after Philippe the Fair of France and the French Pope at the time destroyed the Templar order, some fled to Scotland where they were received sanctuary, and that the Templar order morphed into the Freemasons. And what's interesting is if you study the Freemasons, in fact, this is really peculiar, some of the signs and so-called tokens appear on ancient Egyptian monuments.
Yeah, that is.
And there are some of the Freemasons who claim they go back not only to the Temple of the Templars, but also the Temple of Solomon, and also to ancient Egypt.
Wow.
But I should mention that there's this concept in Freemasonry called the Porch Brethren. Overwhelmingly, ordinary Freemasons are simply making friends and business contacts, and they'll never rise higher than the third level. There's the initial 3 levels. And to get into the initial 3 levels, you have to ask a Freemason. They may not ask you to join. You have to ask a Freemason on 3 separate occasions.
What? I thought you had to be like had a blood relative, I think, in the Freemasons in order to join.
Well, that's ex the mafia. It helps to have a relative, but you don't need one.
Okay.
Now, you will ask a Freemason on 3 separate occasions. And then you need another co-sponsor. And then they will bring up your name at the lodge. And they have a secret ballot after debating you. And they put white balls or black balls into a container. Mm-hmm. And that's where we get our expression blackballed.
Okay.
1 black ball, you don't get in. Now, if you're admitted, you can go through the first 3 levels. The great majority of Freemasons stop there. In Scottish Rite Freemasonry, there's an additional 33 levels. But here's what's interesting. In the top 30 levels, you have to be invited. In the first 3, you have to seek them out. In the last 30, you have to be invited. And this has caused all of these conspiracy theorists who are anti-Mason say that if you don't do the nasty things they're asking you, you'll stop at a certain level.
Right.
Now, of course, this is sadly, when you're secretive, it generates hostility by nature.
Yeah.
And you can't prove what you're actually doing because it's all secret. But it's interesting, at the 33 level, you were talking about an elite of about 75 men. In British Freemasonry, there's 600,000 Freemasons. 75 make the top level.
Wow.
And it's a very elite. In fact, you can actually see their office structure on St. James Square in London. It actually says, I think it says ring twice, but it's a closed system. And again, almost certainly to get to the top level, you have to be play the game correctly, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Which reminds me, this is what tends to happen why civilizations collapse, because eventually everything becomes cronyism. Masons, for example, are obliged to now they use weasel words and say of equal talent, but technically, if a Freemason applies for a job a promotion, whatever, you're supposed to favor the Freemason over the ordinary person.
Okay.
So if you're a boss and you're hiring someone and the candidate comes in,
right,
and he can make a gesture or use some words, "Du garde" is a Freemasonic phrase, a greeting. And or another famous one is, you could, if you're on trial, does the defendant plead guilty or not guilty? By the great architect of the universe, Your Honor, I plead not guilty. What that person, and I'm not a Freemason, by the way, I'm just making it clear. What that person is saying is he's announcing to everyone there he's a Freemason. By the way, Charles Manson used Freemasonic gestures throughout his trial.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he was not a Freemason. He just knew what they were, as I do. But it's interesting, the media blacked it all out. They never showed him doing it, and they never talked about him doing it. He was trying to send messages to members of the jury and to the judge, just in case, if they're Freemasons, because you're supposed to, again, help out a Mason in distress.
Right.
And they're not the only ones to do this. You always, and by the way, you can look at, well, here's how cronyism works. I noticed this for years. Read a book review at the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
That's a legitimate paper. Notice that during the book review, almost invariably, the reviewer mentions a second book that has nothing to do with the first book. He'll say, "This is the greatest novel since," or "This book is almost as great as." And what he's doing is plugging, shall we say, a brother's book.
Okay.
It's cronyism. And the high point of cronyism, I'll be mentioning this in my book, is McGeorge Bundy. He graduated from Yale in 1940. He got a baccalaureate degree. The war breaks out. He goes in as a private. Within 1 year, this private with no military experience is a captain and is helping to plan the invasion of Sicily. Soon after, he's helping to plan the Normandy invasion. This is this person from New England has no military experience whatsoever. After the war, he becomes a professor at Harvard and a dean of the College of Arts and Sciences with his bachelor's degree. And then later becomes a national security advisor for Kennedy and some others. This is a man with a baccalaureate degree with no special skills. And it's just pure cronyism.
Wow.
Notice, for example, and everybody does it. Notice, for example, compare the Obama administration and the Biden administration, cabinet members and so forth. It's the same people.
Yeah.
Often the junior members are now the senior ones, but they were in the previous one. And again, the Republicans do the same thing. It's all cronyism. And by the way, I bet many of your audience members do not realize George Bush Jr. is related to 16 American presidents.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, I did not know.
And he's a distant cousin of John Kerry.
Wow, I did not know that.
It's and incidentally, this is called back in colonial days, Lord Lugard of British Empire coined the term indirect rule. The British, for example, were able to control West Africa with a relatively small number of officials. And the way they did that is they governed through the tribal elite, they called them. The local tribal leaders were allowed considerable latitude to do everything locally in the village, but then they had to obey on the big issues, the British.
Yeah. And
what has essentially happened in America and other countries, we're doing the same thing. This is called synarchy, by the way, rule by secret societies. The political figures are frontmen. And Mae Bracel, who was a conspiracy theorist, passed away. She once said that all presidents are chosen 20 years ahead of time before they're actually elected. And there's also William Milton Cooper talked about, or was it Milton William Cooper? I forget, but Cooper, the late conspiracy theorist, was gunned down in his own house.
Not to interrupt you, but I wonder if there's some truth to that, because if you think about it, like almost every president has also been a Freemason.
Yes. Oh, yes. And by the way, on the odd occasion when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're ousted pretty quickly.
Right.
Again, I'm not trying to promote Trump here. I'm not saying
Yeah. No, I get you.
I found it interesting, the visceral hatred directed towards him. And I think it in part was that he actually thought he was president. Bill Clinton said famously in a trip to Ireland in the 1990s, he said, he made it in a sense that he was joking, but it had a ring of truth. He says, when you become president, you realize other people make the decisions.
Right.
And I have a feeling what happened was Trump actually thought he was running the country. And they thought, this fellow has to go.
Yeah.
He's supposed to do what we say.
Right.
And incidentally, historically, it's been alleged, Cooper said this, that they choose people with scandals in their background so they can be manipulated and blackmailed. The trouble is our culture is becoming so corrupt, that's almost becoming impossible now.
Right.
Gary Hart in the 1980s, running for president, I think it was the 80s, was pictured with a pretty girl on his lap, and it wrecked his presidential campaign. Now they can have all kinds of scandals, and they just keep going.
Yeah.
That reminds me, during the Cold War, for years, the KGB was blackmailing Americans it was called a swan operation. They'd have a really pretty girl strike up a conversation with some low-level official who was in a hotel or bar, and then get him drunk, and then take him up to a room, and then get photographs of him misbehaving.
Yep.
And would then blackmail him. Well, by the late 70s, early 80s, the KGB was reporting they couldn't do that anymore because the Americans were so corrupt. When they threatened to say, we will tell your wife about this, the man would say, well, she's cheating too.
Oh, man. Wow.
So they started to photograph American citizens in fake videos with boys.
Yeah.
To blackmail them that way.
Right.
That's my chime clock in the background.
Yeah, I was wondering. That's okay. Here's a really great question that I have on my list of questions, actually. Being that this list again a whole bunch of really crazy secret societies that are out there. What is, in your opinion, with your research that you've come across, is the most powerful organizations that you've come across that you think it's like the what do I have on here? The Bilderberg Group, for example, is a really powerful organization. And then you have the alleged Illuminati, you have the alleged New World Order organization. Which do you think has the most powerful influence over our U.S. government?
Well, over the world or the government, I should say several answers here.
Okay.
First of all, Carol Quigley, late Carol Quigley, taught at Georgetown University, and obviously, oddly enough, Bill Clinton's favorite professor, and Clinton actually mentions him in his acceptance speech at his inauguration.
Right.
He claimed the world is being controlled by the Round Table Group, which often isn't mentioned.
Okay.
And it's basically the Rhodes scholarships are connected to it for truth seeking. I was actually, as a college student, nominated for a Rhodes scholarship and did not get it. But there's no sour grapes here.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, of course, was a Rhodes Scholar. And by the way, I should mention, if you look at old videos of Bill Clinton, you'll see this all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
That's and again, symbols. I say when the communication, this is supposed to be the horns of Satan.
Right.
But it also can mean "I love you" in sign language.
Okay.
And one great element of an effective secret symbol is it has a double meaning. So when Bill Clinton flashes this, is he saying "Hell, Satan," or is he addressing the hottie in row 2? Probably with Bill, it's the hottie in row 2, but
or maybe
never know for certain.
Or maybe both.
But his professor, Carol Quigley, claimed there was a group, and incidentally, it's an unusual secret side. There's no secret handshakes. There's no secret passwords, but they are powerful men, all of whom know each other. and they foster one another based on friendship and connection rather than on ability. And according to Carol Quigley, they dominate the world. And he claims such groups as, for example, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Chatham House Group in England are simply subgroups of this. Now, you mentioned the Bilderbergers. There's approximately 80 members. And what's interesting, to join them, you can't join them. They don't really, shall we say, audition members. They recognize them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If you become really, really important, you'll be a member, which oddly enough is the same technique of recruitment used by Hells Angels biker group. Wow. That you can't apply to the Hells Angels, but they'll recognize you as one of their own. Okay. I find it interesting, the parallel, Hells Angels, bikers, and Bilderbergers.
Wow.
The 80 members, chief members, they also have useful tools. So, for example, at their meetings, there'll be another 40 people there that are not regular Bilderbergers. There'll be prime ministers, presidents, tools.
Yeah.
And they're, for some reason, Niall Ferguson, the history professor, has attended Bilderberger meetings, which strikes me as kind of curious. He's well published, and perhaps they think they can influence him this way. But he's attended, but he's not a member. Now, those core 80 members have a net wealth greater than Americans. This is how rich they are.
Yeah.
And incidentally, one growing problem I mentioned early on of decadence and decline. Usually, when you get great concentration of wealth, it leads to some kind of disaster because the poor become really numerous, the mega rich become fewer and fewer, and then finally the masses figure out, how come this handful of people have all this power and money?
Yeah.
And once the masses rise up, everything's destroyed, but including the rich people. The Bezos, and for example, and also the has more wealth than the gross national product of Kenya, also pronounced Kenya, which is got 52 million people. 52 million people working 5 days a week at least, maybe more. Now, there's clearly something wrong here. These 52 million people are clearly producing more value than this one man. Wow. Yet he has more money than 52 million. Indeed, there's a core group of about 40 billionaires that are really now dominating things. And it's getting quite frightening. There's just too much power. And by the way, I'm now quoting an economic historian from the University of California who said that today we have the richest people who ever walked the earth and the poorest. People forget that we're seeing unbelievable levels of poverty.
Yeah, that's true.
If you had gone to Africa in 1800, the standard of living was not that much different from an Englishman. People forget that half of the people in England had dirt floors in 1800.
Sure.
But now, one of really eye-opening experience for me is my first job offer was at the University of Liberia in West Africa, and I didn't take it. I had never seen such absolute poverty that I witnessed when I went there. Yet another curious thing is how healthy everyone looked. The people looked like they had left a gym. And what is happening there, that's again Darwinian selection. Those who were weak were not surviving. Yeah. And it reminds me when I was in Russia, this one young Russian college student told me that when he said, these are old programs, some of your guests will recognize it. He said, when I went to America, I was expecting Baywatch, but it was Roseanne.
That's funny. Wow. And that's far from the truth. Like, it's not far from the truth, I should say.
Well, by the way, one point I should mention about power. The secret societies, because you have the skeptics say, does anyone really think they can control the world? they more or less play with it.
Yeah.
It's like a farmer does not have to control the movement of every sheep all the time.
It's almost like one big chess game.
Yeah, well, I mean, what the farmer's doing, he's controlling the like it's called a Merriweather. That's a castrated ram that leads the flock, and he controls that with the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And then if anything wanders away, it's brought back in.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do is basically the herd can do certain activities, and unless you draw attention to yourself or somehow disrupt the system, you can have your own life. But as soon as you cause disruptions or somehow rock the boat, you'll be somehow taken down.
Ugh.
And incidentally, I'm now plagiarizing 1984 by George Orwell. Wonderful. He's got that party member O'Brien talking to Winston, the main character.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about that the reason we have poverty and war and terrorism, he said, if everyone were well fed, everyone had peace, everyone were educated, it would quickly become obvious that no elite was necessary. They serve no function. But he says when we create poverty and war and terrorism, it frightens people and they think they need us.
Oh, wow.
Now, again, that could be why we have these one crisis after another.
Yeah.
It frightens the people, and they gravitate out of fear towards their leaders. And again, the leaders, if secret society, again, information is correct, are simply the puppets of faceless people. In other words, the really powerful people, we don't even know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not the public people. There's people behind them.
Oh, yeah, of course. So, and America's, we're not as innocent as we say we are. We have dirty little secrets in our country.
Realize now that the gross national debt is now, every taxpayer owes $220,000.
It's crazy. Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And what typically happens in history, when debts become too great, there's some kind of uprising that just erases them.
Yeah.
They'll never be paid.
Yeah.
And it's just, and incidentally, it's getting worse and worse. Years ago, a bank would never lend more than 2.5 times your income on a mortgage.
Right.
Now it's 6 to 7 times.
Mm.
People are buying houses that are far too large, far too expensive. They're living beyond their means.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And it's become a serious problem.
Yeah, no,
it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and hopefully it gets better at some point, but I don't know.
I'm so old. I graduated with a PhD. You know what my student debt was when I graduated?
What was that?
0. Oh. And in fact, I had about $30,000 left over.
Wow.
From scholarships and so forth.
Yeah. I feel bad for the college students now and the kids who graduate, because when they graduate from college, they have so much debt already that they're starting with, and they can't pay that back. So then when they, have to get a job, and then they get a house, so now they got house debt on top of, old college student loan debt.
Exactly. And by the way, back in those days, this is how we've changed. When I was accepted the position as a PhD student at the University of Glasgow, which is it was established 1451. It's a really great school. I was simultaneously offered a scholarship at my master's school, which is University of Virginia, and then one at McGill University in Canada, and then Glasgow. And I decided to go to Glasgow because Scotland and so forth. But I was admitted to Oxford PhD program. And I never gave it serious consideration to go there because they offered 0 money, and I wasn't going to borrow money to pay for Oxford. But today, they've conditioned these students, if they get admitted to Harvard or University of Massachusetts,
right,
they think I've got to go to Harvard and get in debt. And it's a whole different world. It's what I'm trying to say is our wounds are self-inflicted.
Right.
It's the way, and the parents even add to it. There's just, I was just talking last night to a former student of mine who just got his son was accepted in Yale. and he's worried about the debt
Yeah.
he's going to incur.
Yeah.
They play a game now where they give everybody a scholarship, but it only covers a fraction of the amount. Back in my day, and by the way, I'm so old, you can find my graduating pictures on Cave Walls and Friends. When they gave us a scholarship, it covered everything. Plus, and now they have these partial. Apparently, it's been said that in the 1990s is when it starts.
Wow.
They learned through marketing. This is actually true. If you charge $10,000 tuition, you're less likely to get the student than if you charge $20,000 and give them a $10,000 scholarship.
Yeah,
it's psychology, and that's what they're doing now. They'll give partial scholarships, and the parents think this is great.
Yeah. Well, the colleges are also just thinking they're playing the numbers game too, like enrollment and, also what they can save and versus what the payee can pay them.
And also, I should mention, when I first started, I've spent my entire real career at Shawnee State. It was a new university. When I first arrived here, there was no bureaucracy at all. If I had a problem, for example, I could call the registrar, one person who had a secretary on the phone, he'd fix it. I could call the president. I could call everybody. There were no deans here.
Right.
Now we have 140 faculty, and I think it's like 1,000 employees.
Wow.
For a school with 3,000 students.
Yeah.
I don't even know what some of these people do. And now I can't contact anyone. When you call a line, you get push 1, push 2, push 3.
Yeah.
And nobody does anything, and everybody just goes to meetings, and it's, again, the whole system seems becoming corrupt.
Yeah. I just yell into the phone and I say, get me somebody live on the phone. But that doesn't work either. So we're getting near the end of the show. I can't believe we're over an hour already, but I've been having a great time. I hope everybody feels like you're in a history class. I feel like we're getting a history lesson and a lot of awesome things that we've been talking about with secret society and all the conspiracy theories within them. And I know we went off on a little tangent, but it was an exciting topic. And, it really does connect with so many things. And we had such a great time with author Dr. Mark Mirabello here on the Strange Oddities podcast. We had a few people in the chat. I just want to give them a quick shout out. Guys, Gerard was there. Lefty Lucy, I'm not sure who that was, but funny name in there. I want to give a big shout out to Gravitational Time Vortex. They were in there. And of course, Miss Carrie Hopper and my co-producer, Debbie LaBelle, who, by the way, is my new co-producer of Strange Oddities Podcast. She helps me get guest contacts and stuff like that. So, she's a big help to the show. Doctor, before we end the show, where can people find your books if they're interested in reading about your published books, and where can they get them? If you want to give any plugs to your website or anything like that.
Yes. And by the way, we talked about history classes. I should mention when we were forced online during the coronavirus, I recorded a lot of my lectures for classes.
Oh, nice.
We're at the Internet Archive. Some of your members these are regular history lectures I think there's about 70 of them there. They're on the Internet Archive under my name. Now, regarding contact, I have a website, my name, Mark Mirabello. You can see the spelling on the screen, .com. And in fact, my books are available through, there's Amazon and there's Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. One bookseller I like to use is bookdepository.com, which is actually in Britain, but they ship around the world free and there's no sales tax.
Oh, nice.
So it's bookdepository.com. They have all my books. And of course, you get them from the publishers directly. Inner Traditions, that's in the United States, has The Traveler's Guide to the Afterlife. Mandrake of Oxford in England has a lot of my books. They published Ode Brotherhood, Handbook for Rebels and Outlaws, Cannibal Within. Cannibal Within is a horror novel. It's very different from the rest of them.
I was going to say.
All the rest are nonfiction.
With the term cannibal, it must be pretty dark.
Well, I kind of went, it's actually based on a story of a woman who actually came to my office, was telling me about, it's really a strange story of these creatures that feed on us. and are highly evolved entities. But I embellished it into a novel because I didn't have enough information. But I kind of find it hard to believe that I wrote it because I'm a very morally conservative guy, and this is a really violent book with all sorts of odd sex crimes in it, and describing these creatures attacking us.
Wow.
So, but the best place, and it's a lame site that I designed it myself, so you have to scroll down to see everything. MarkMirabello.com.
All right, great. And anything upcoming that you're working on that you'd like to share?
Well, again, when I finish the current project, I think the working title will probably be Secret Societies, A Skeleton Key.
Very cool.
In fact, oddly enough, when I was on Coast to Coast AM, this has been the first time in my life, a publisher contacted me. Usually I have to go to publishers, and this time a publisher contacted me.
Nice.
So I felt like finally I got asked to the prom after all these years. So, but it'll be coming out. It takes me forever to write a book. I'm in the writing stages now, but hopefully I'll have it done within a year.
Nice.
And it'll be Secret Societies under my name.
Oh, so when it comes out, I hope I get a signed autograph copy.
I will. By the way, is your if you'd send me your mailing address, I'll make sure you get a.
All right. Copy. Awesome. Really cool. And what was it like? One quick question. What was it like working with America's Book of Secrets and Ancient Aliens? How was it working with them?
Actually, it was an experience and a great deal of fun. I went to Washington, D.C., and they took me into this old private club. It was built in 1780. And they bring in a director, and they basically ask you questions for 4 hours.
Wow.
They have a series of questions. What they're doing then is taking clips. That's what you see in the show.
Yeah.
In fact, from my point of view, I thought some of the best material I was giving was not in the show because they were trying to argue. Well, they were trying to the thesis of the alien sort of thing.
Right.
But it was fun, and I got a free trip. They paid all expenses.
Nice.
And it was enjoyable. If you have time, there's a little anecdote. I was sitting across. They filmed several shows simultaneously. I didn't know that. When I was being filmed, the same film crew went upstairs to film an anthropologist for an entirely different show. And then they finished with him and filmed me. And I was across the street. This is in Georgetown University area, Washington. Across the street, waiting to be called. And the director walks over, introduced himself, and said, "We'll be ready for you in 10 minutes." And meanwhile, I'm talking to the director, and he identifies himself as this director from History Channel. He walks away, and these 4 young college students from Georgetown University were sitting at the table, and they're looking at me with amazement. And they said, "Do you teach at George?" They had T-shirts on. "Do you teach at Georgetown University?" And of course, I have a kind of a cynical sense of humor, and I said, "Well," I said, "to tell the truth, they needed an expert on deadly cults, and they couldn't find one at Georgetown. So they called me in from Shawnee State University in Ohio."
Nice.
I said it with a straight face, and those boys were thinking, oh, wow.
Wow, we found somebody. Nice.
So, very good. But I enjoyed the show. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, no, it was great having you, and I'd love to stay in touch with you and have you on in the future. Absolutely would be great.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, great. Have a great night, and take care of yourself. Be well.
Okay, thank you. Right. Good night now.
Good night. All right. So, guys, that was Dr. Mark Mirabello. He has been seen and featured on Ancient Aliens, as well as America's Book of Secrets. And I hope you enjoyed the topic tonight. I know it was very heavy for some that don't know a lot about secret societies. The topic gets very heavy. It gets into politics a little bit, gets into conspiracy theories, which can be very heavy. So if you don't know enough about that area of subject, it can be like your brain swells and you're like, what did I just hear? So, guys, tune in next week. I believe the date is 10/14. October 14th, I'm going to have Dr. Serge. I hope I have his last name correctly. Dr. Serge Kahli or Kahili. Dr. Serge Kahili. He wrote a book about dreams and tapping into dreams. He's a shaman from Hawaii. Yes, I have a shaman from Hawaii coming on the show, and I can't wait to have Dr. Serge Kahili. Kahili King, I believe, is his full name. Yes, Dr. Serge Kahili King. There we go. I think I said it correctly. All right. I got to learn how to say their names, you know. I don't want to look like a fool. Guys, I'm back live. Tune in every week, Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Catch us simultaneously, watch us live, chat live with us. As you can see, you can ask questions during the show. Guys, there's a lot of people in the chat. I try to keep up as I can. If I miss anybody, I apologize. Those who tuned in tonight, thanks for watching the show. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the show. Go to the YouTube channel, click that little bell. Follow us on Facebook. All the guest information and news is announced on the Facebook page. You don't want to miss any news and announcements. Go there and catch it all on the Facebook page for Strange Oddities Podcast. All right, so without further delay, I'm going to end the show. Hope you guys liked the return live. Hope you enjoyed Dr. Mark Mirabello. I felt like I sat in a history classroom. So it was great. All right, guys, I want to wish everybody well. Good luck. Be well. I don't know. God bless America. And after all that, I don't know. That's it. Guys, have a great night. I'm going to go ahead and play my video here.